To me, my father was one of the most important factors in my life. And I realized that the key element in my life was that I never got that pat on the back from my father. I never got any feeling of approval, ever, throughout his whole life. So it made me angry. But my father was the important factor, because he was an amazing man. I think lots of roles that I play in movies are fashioned after my father. He was probably physically the strongest man in the town, spent most of his life in saloons drinking. I've seen him, when he's had a few drinks, take a glass and bite off a hunk of it and chew it.
You give the impression of living in terrible poverty. How bad was that poverty?
Well, how bad? I mean, if you look at some poverty in African countries, it doesn't need to be as bad as that, but it was poverty. There were many times when we didn't have enough to eat. You know, I had 6 sisters and my mother, my father not there very often. And as I look back, I think that if I were writing a sequel to my book, I'd be kinder to my father. I would understand, perhaps, from his point of view, how difficult it was to cope. But I wrote more from the point of view of someone who was hungry for certain things.
There was this strong influence of your father. There were also 6 sisters and your mother. What sort of influence did that have on you, having that strong female
that was
influence?
A suffocating influence. I mean, here I was relegated to 7 women wanting to enter into the world of men. But that was a big factor in, I think, projecting me into becoming an actor, because being an actor, which is a childish profession, is a way of escaping. You begin to live in a world of fantasy.
So you tried to get away from the female influence. You tremendously admired the masculine influence of your father, and yet you've said here that you don't want a movement for women to be stronger. You want men to be weaker. Why?
You know, there's such a hue and cry about women's lib. I don't quite understand it, because I've always been in favor of everybody doing what they're capable of doing. My wife is the president of my production company. She runs all the business affairs. She takes care of it because she has saved me when I've had a disastrous experience with someone who I thought I was a friend and lost all my money. Out of necessity, she took over. So I feel everybody obviously should do what they want to do, but I think sometimes women place too much of an emphasis on women's lib, like they have to be emancipated. Whereas I feel that not enough emphasis is placed on what I call men's lib. Why can't men be weak? Why must they always be so macho? Why can't a man cry? Because I'm aware that women are stronger than men. Women can endure pain more than men. Women have an intuitive sense that men don't have. So why not recognize those factors? And men have a problem in realizing that in order to be weak, show weakness, you have to be strong. It's only a strong man who can really openly show weakness. Otherwise, if you're not strong enough, you're frightened to show weakness. And that's what I mean by men's lib.
It almost seems an odd thing coming from one of the world's great tough guys. How do you respond these days to the modern tough guys that we see in the movies, like Rambo?
Well,
really quite different, aren't they?
I think sometimes it's a little exaggerated. It's sort of interesting because in the very first Rambo, they wanted me to play the part that Richard Crenna plays. I looked at the script. I said, no. I said, I'll tell you what's wrong with it. And I had a long talk with the director. I said, what we must do, I said, if I play that part, if I created this man who became a misfit, a killing machine, at the end of the picture, I should destroy him. I should kill him. Now, I've kidded Stallone about this, because if they had followed my advice, they would have lost about $1 billion in sequels, but it would have been right. But I think, everything goes in phases. I think the Rambo influence has sort of faded down. How macho can a man be?
You had quite a macho image in the early days in Hollywood, though, didn't you? I mean, there were quite a number of women that you were involved with.
I've passed out of the thing. I mean, when Burt Lancaster and I did, not too long ago, a movie called Tough Guys, we did that because it was a nostalgic attempt to portray these 2 macho guys who refused to give up. And yet there was a childish quality about them in their attempt to still want to do what they used to do 30, 40 years ago.
You ducked the issue about the women that you had relationships with in the early years. There were a number, weren't there?
No, Jenny, listen. life is made up of many elements. It's made up of love, death, and it's made up of sex. You cannot ignore sex. Sex is a very important part of every person's life. So I certainly dealt with that subject to a certain extent, and I always felt, well, if there are pages about that people reading the book don't want to read, they can just skim over those pages and go on with the story.
One of the women that you write about most fondly, I think, is Marlene Dietrich. She turned out to be a very good friend to you, didn't she?
Oh, Marlene Dietrich was a wonderful woman. And to me, one of the most poignant stories was when I had just been divorced. I was making my first trip to Europe. I was a little frightened. I was in New York. I was all alone, waiting for the car to come collect my luggage and take me to my trip to Europe. And I wanted to say goodbye to somebody. I couldn't think of anyone. And I thought of Marlene. I called her and I said, look, I'm just going to Europe for my first visit, and I just wanted to say goodbye. Well, she said, who's taking you to the airport? I said, well, no one. The car's downstairs. She says, I'll be right there. I said, no, I'm out. She said, she hung up. Within 5 minutes, she was there. She took me to the airport, got on the plane with me, and the plane was delayed for about an hour. So we sat there and talked. Before she left, she gave me a gold St. Christopher medal with her initials on the back, which I've always kept. She said, keep this for luck. Well, I think that was a touching thing because, and very often in my life as I look back, I realize that women have played a very important part in shaping what has happened to me at different points in my life.
Your mother's influence really did continue throughout your life, didn't it? You named your production company after her.
That's right. See, my mother always thought, oh, America's such a wonderful land. I never heard her complain. So, years later, I came back. I was now a so-called movie star, and my mother would look at me with pride and introduce me to her immigrant friends and say, look, my son, his name in lights. So she said, America's such a wonderful land. And I said, look, Ma, America's such a wonderful land, I'll put your name in lights as a joke. But then I named my company Brian, after my mother, which is still the name of my production company. And then, about a year later, I took her to New York, got her in a big limousine one night, we went up Times Square, and we stopped opposite a theater, and there was a big billboard that took up a whole block. And I said, see, Ma, look, see, in lights, it was a name that I taught my mother how to write. Brian, I said, see your name? In lights, Brian presents Spartacus. She just looked and said, America's such a wonderful land.
Spartacus was one thing that you really wanted to make. Why were you so passionate about the story of this slave?
To me, Spartacus represented a man who fought for freedom and who almost overthrew, who was a peasant. He, too, was illiterate, and who almost overthrew the Roman Empire. But to me, there was an added significance because the writer of Spartacus was one of the writers on the blacklist. We were going through one of the worst periods in American history called the McCarthy era, which is very important because there's vestiges of that seem to be coming up now. People who drape the American flag around them and seem to be so patriotic, falsely patriotic. But these writers could not use their names. They were on the blacklist, so it was so hypocritical because they were writing under assumed names. When Dalton Trumbull started writing Spartacus, he wrote under the name of Sam Jackson. And then when we determined what name should we put on the screen, and suddenly on an impulse, I said, I know how to solve it. He said, what? I said, I'll put Dalton Trumbull's name on the screen. Gee, people say, are you crazy, Kirk? It will kill you. It'll run you out of the business and all that. So I said, no, for that day, for the first time, I left a pass for Dalton Trumbull to come on the studio, and the blacklist was broken.
Now, Spartacus was a film that you very much wanted to make. There was another film that you very much wanted to play the lead in.
Oh, don't. You really know how to hurt a guy. See it coming, Jenny. Go ahead. I'm braced for it. Go ahead.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and you didn't get the lead part, did you? Why was that?
Well, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a book written by Ken Kesey that I read that book, and I loved it. And I bought that book. And I took that book to Broadway. I paid someone to write it as a play, and they said, that part, McMurphy's for me. And I played it on Broadway, and I kept it running for about 6 months, and then I tried to make a movie out of it for 10 years. And Michael, who was doing the streets of San Francisco, then said, look, Dad, let's be partners. Let me see what I can do with it. I said, go ahead. I said, I've been trying for 10 years. And he finally put it together. But by that time, they thought, such a ridiculous thought, Jenny, that they needed a younger actor to play that part. So they pick on a fellow called Jack Nicholson to play my part. And what does he do? He plays it brilliantly, gets an Oscar, doesn't play it the way I think it should be played. And I say to Jack, I say to Michael, listen, you didn't do it right.
And now, of course, people come up to you in the street and you think they're going to say, Kirk Douglas, can I have your autograph?
You insist, you insist on hurting me.
And they say, oh, you're Michael Douglas's dad. How
That's
does that go down?
I love that. You know, of the... I'm coming out of the gym and I'm feeling great, and I'm walking down the street to my office, and the construction workers are saying, hi, Kirk, and the taxi drivers are waving, and I hear, Mr. Douglas, and I turn around and there's this beautiful young girl, and I think, well, I guess I've got time to give her an autograph. She walks up to me, and I look into these beautiful blue eyes, and she looks up at me lovingly and adoringly, and by now I'm sucking in my gut and flexing my muscles a little bit, and she says, wow, Michael Douglas's father. So, that pleases me, you see, because, to me it's immortality.